President Trump's promise of a 30% tariff hit European capitals like a lightning bolt. Early that morning, German finance officials were already jotting down urgent countermeasures, adding up to a massive $102.2 billion. The euro-dollar exchange rate wobbled with the first headlines, and factory executives in Stuttgart started raising concerns. So will the EU adjust its labeling rules or overhaul its entire trade approach with the United States? Let's break down how this massive retaliation plan, coordinated by Berlin's core leadership triangle, came together, who stands to benefit, and who could lose out. But before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our latest reports. Trump's tariff threat and the EU's shocked response. In spring 2025, Trump stood on the campaign stage and declared an end to what he called the free ride for foreign-made products. That single line sent shivers through EU institutions. Brussels still remembers the chaos from 6 years of tariff uncertainty around steel and aluminum. Within 12 hours, the EU's Trade Directorate activated its pre-agreed emergency protocol, updating a strategic file called the Stepwise Retaliation Framework. The first page listed a $22.6 billion tariff menu. The second, more sensitive, contained a classified escalation list worth over $102 billion. The $22.6 billion shortlist versus the $102.2 billion full strike. To understand how these lists were crafted, it helps to look at the EU's trade playbook since the pandemic. The Commission has taken a show the stick before swinging it approach. Experts cross-referenced export data, voter behavior by United States state, and industry-specific vulnerabilities to pinpoint where retaliation would create the most political and economic tension in the United States. One early target: niche agricultural exports like almonds, walnuts, and dates from California and Oregon. These products make up nearly 40% of their market share in Europe, and they support a web of local industries: farmers, ports, packagers, even insurance firms. The hope? Hit a full supply chain and stir up lobbying pressure in Washington. Meanwhile, Germany drew a red line around cars, just like it did back in 2018. Germany's auto dilemma, France's wine strategy. Germany exports over 600,000 premium cars to the United States each year. These high-margin vehicles help offset the costs of keeping low-volume models alive in the domestic market. Trump had once called European cars a national security threat, which already rattled German manufacturers, especially those with United States plants like BMW and Mercedes in Arkansas. Now, the concern is different. If Trump slaps on new tariffs, German car makers may need to fast-track production shifts to Mexico, leaving German suppliers in places like North Rhine-Westphalia with fewer orders. Berlin argued that a strong counterstrike in the auto sector would make Washington think twice, but France and Italy wanted to focus retaliation on food and drink first. So, automobiles were placed in Phase 2 of the EU's broader response package. France's position? It's about more than just economics. For the Élysée Palace, the symbol of French culinary prestige is politically sacred. During Trump's first term, tariffs hit wine, cheese, and brandy, slashing market share in the United States by around 20% in just 2 seasons. Recovery began once duties were lifted and travel resumed post-pandemic. But rebuilding United States distributor networks has been slow. Paris fears that another tariff wave would permanently damage trade relationships built over 40 years. So France has included American whiskey, cocktail bases, and premium goods on its first retaliation list. The plan is clever. If Trump promotes Kentucky bourbon over French wine, the EU will simply mirror the tariff, cutting off both markets equally. Italy sees the world through a similar lens, but its vulnerability lies in luxury yachts and fashion. Wealthy buyers from Florida and Texas drive demand for 40 to 60-foot yachts made in Tuscany and Liguria. During the 2018 to 2020 tariff battles, this segment was mostly untouched. Trump chose not to disrupt high-end U.S. buyers. But Rome isn't taking chances this time. Italy has pushed for a 25% tariff on yachts in that size category as part of the EU's new package, ready to strike if Washington targets its export sectors again. The goal behind the EU's strategy is to create a shock effect, a calculated response in case U.S. tariffs become reality. Now that Europe's retaliation lists are in place, what exactly is going through the minds of American policymakers? Leaked briefing notes from the U.S. Department of Commerce reveal something important. This time, the EU's countermeasure list is more focused than it was in 2018. Instead of targeting broad product groups, Europe is pinpointing smaller sectors with maximum political and economic impact. Some examples? The list includes heavy-duty truck manufacturers in Wisconsin, organic soybean farms in Iowa, boutique motorcycle companies in Pennsylvania, and cotton growers in Georgia. This creates a complex web of pressure. Republican lawmakers don't want to alienate rural voters, and Democrats, though critical of Trump's trade policies, don't want to upset union allies. Another critical element in the EU's $12.2 billion stimulus is aimed at the digital infrastructure space, specifically cloud computing. At first, that might sound odd, but here's the reasoning. Most hardware in European data centers is US-made and crosses borders as taxable goods. The draft plan says that any hardware with significant US chip, rack, or cooling system content will be taxed. This is already worrying Silicon Valley giants. If European data projects slow down, it could disrupt existing digital service contracts and cloud rollouts across the continent. Energy and LNG, the strategic gray zone. Then there's energy, especially LNG, or liquefied natural gas. The United States has become a crucial supplier as the European Union shifts away from Russian energy. The current EU package does not include tariffs on LNG-related logistics, but it does leave the door open. Brussels is being careful not to contradict its own energy transition strategy, but it's also reminding Washington that energy is a two-way street. Some in Berlin argue that using energy tariffs as leverage could hurt consumers, but coalition leaders have chosen not to limit the EU Commission's options. Defense exceptions and NATO risks. A key question remains. How could all this affect transatlantic defense cooperation? Under EU trade law, defense items count as goods, but Brussels and Washington have agreed to leave room for flexibility here. Systems like Patriot PAC-3 missiles, Abrams tank kits, and F-16 modernization upgrades have been placed under exemption rules. So no, Europe isn't directly targeting US arms exports. But if a full-scale tariff war breaks out, collateral damage in the defense sector is likely. That's especially risky for NATO, where unity is critical. 3 possible outcomes for the US-EU trade future. Zooming out, the ECB, or European Central Bank, ran quick forecasts. If mild tariffs are introduced, Eurozone growth could fall by 0.2%, and US growth by 0.25%. A full retaliation scenario could shave off 0.4 to 0.6% from both economies, and drive consumer prices up. After the inflation spikes of 2023 and 2024, policymakers are honestly eager to avoid another economic balancing act. That's why the EU's current stance is clear. We hold the stick, but we'll pull it back if needed. As the US debates its next move, one immediate indicator will be the fate of the current steel and aluminum quota deal. If it's extended, tension cools. If not, a new crisis looms. The second signal to watch? A formal authorization note from the EU Council at its December summit. The more firmly it backs the phrase, implement a broad package when needed, the louder the message to Washington. Final thoughts. Will the retaliation stay on paper? There are 3 possible outcomes now. First, extension of the current quota and tariff formula until 2028. In that case, the $22.6 billion list stays unused, and the larger $102.2 billion plan remains locked away. Second, the EU launches its $22.6 billion retaliation, prompting WTO lawsuits and market turmoil. But, no lasting damage to relations. Third, Trump imposes harsh tariffs, especially on steel, cars, and agriculture. The EU then rolls out the full $102.2 billion response by 2026, leading to major trade disruptions. In the third case, supply chains would shift more toward China, India, and Southeast Asia. Transatlantic trade would drop below pre-2010 levels, growth would stall, and investor confidence would weaken. So the EU's 2-tier list is no longer just a bluff. It's a risk management tool, carefully calculated by Berlin, Paris, Rome, and others to avoid a repeat of 2018's chaos. Now, every US tariff threat automatically triggers a response from Europe. It's in both sides' best interest to avoid escalation, but that fact is often lost in the noise. That's why Europe is showing the short list first, while keeping the long list ready. If both sides stay cool, these tariffs may never be activated. But if rhetoric flies like currency, a $102.2 billion retaliation package could hit the front page of the Brussels Gazette overnight, dragging the global economy back into uncertainty. What's your take on this? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep up with global trade developments, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for our next story.